Welcome to Raising Daughters, the podcast that helps parents learn the best ways to support their daughters as they navigate the high levels of stress, anxiety, pressure, and uncertainties so pervasive in our culture today. Dr. Tim Jordan is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician who has specialized in counseling girls for over 30 years and sheds light on the realities of today's young women in all facets of their lives. This is your opportunity to learn how to better support your daughters, making them feel safe, secure, and truly loved in the midst of life's ups and downs. Here is your host, Dr. Tim.
Hey friends, Dr. Tim Jordan back here with you with a brand new episode of Raising Daughters. I appreciate you coming by this podcast every week, talking about girls of all ages, talking about the issues that they're facing these days, giving you, I hope, some tips and some tools to support them more effectively. I thought I'd talk about older kids today because for a couple of reasons. Number one, all three of my kids are over the age of 30. Actually, one of them is 40. And wow. So I watched them approach that 30-year milestone and their friends. And I'm also counseling more and more young women in my counseling practice who are in their early mid-20s. And so I'm hearing a lot of angst and uncertainty and just a lot of stress about growing up. I did a podcast, I think it was about a year ago. I interviewed some high school seniors who were flipped out about not wanting to grow up. But I thought we'd talk about some young adults who are a little bit older than that, because a lot of your kids, even if they're not that age, they're gonna get there. And so things have changed even in the last 10, 20 years about the kinds of pressures that the young people are facing. So what I thought I would do is have an expert come on today to help us with that. So I asked Kate Berski to come on the show. She's a mental health advocate who has survived her 20s and her 30s. And so she has experience going through that. But she wrote a book that just came out recently called 30 Phobia, Why Your 20s Suck and How to Get Unstuck, which is a great title. So first of all, thanks so much, Kate, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. And I listened to that episode you did with the high school seniors, and it just confirmed to me that 30 phobia is not always a 20-something problem. Sometimes it's a teen problem as well. It starts really, really early. So I'm glad we're having this chat.
In some of my retreats and camps, I'll have girls as young as grade school these days talking about how stressed they are about their futures. Fifth graders stressed out about college, their futures. It's like it just keeps going younger and younger. But your book is about people who, young adults who are facing their 30s. And I wonder today, I work with girls in my camps, my retreats, my counseling practice. And so I wonder if some of that stress, uncertainty, and anxiety about approaching milestones like turning 30, I wonder if part of that is because today they have more choices than they used to. Back in the day, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever years ago, they could be a teacher or a nurse, maybe a secretary or a mom. And today, young women are told you can be whatever you want to be. And I'm wondering if that's a great thing, but I wonder if that's one of the things that's causing some of the angst about that being in your 20s and approaching 30.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. There's quite an old book now that you've probably read called The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz. And in it, he says that, as humans, we imagine that choice is going to be a really brilliant thing. But in reality, more choices means more stress. And I think the 20s as a decade has always been a decade of uncertainty. Just about everything in your life, all the biggest life choices are up in the air at that point. You don't know when you're 22 who you're going to end up with, if you're going to have a family, how much money you'll be earning, what your career path's going to be, where you're going to live, if you'll buy a house. Everything is so up in the air. And the reality is that uncertainty breeds anxiety. As humans, in general, we are hardwired to hate and avoid anxiety, because if you feel anxious in the wild, it probably means something's coming to attack you. The outside forces that are attacking us now might not be quite so physical, but definitely piling on a huge amount of pressure on young people. And I think, we started off before the call talking about social media and the pervasive impact. I'm talking about a generation that grew up on the internet, Gen Z, 20-somethings now. And, they've been exposed to so many options, so many choices, and so many lifestyles, many of them incredibly overblown and unrealistic online. And that just serves to widen what I call the expectation gap, which is their expectations out of life and every element of it are getting higher. And the reality is they're living in a world that's making it much more difficult to progress and make these choices. So their lived experience is probably low and reducing. So there's this huge gap, this expectation gap between expectations and reality. And it's making young people feel really under pressure, really stressed out, anxious, disappointed, disillusioned. And the closer they get to 30, more panicked, that the women I speak to, they'll commonly say, I feel like I'm running out of time, I can't waste time. They're really feeling a huge amount of pressure. And my mission is to take away that false deadline, push back on those societal pressures, and just give them permission to breathe a little bit, reassure them that what they're going through is absolutely normal, that they're not alone. It's a huge reason why I use lots of data in my work, just to kind of say it might look like everybody else has everything figured out, but the reality is nobody does. Everybody is still figuring it out in their 20s. So you do have time and you are doing fine. That is my message.
What's your background? How did you get to this passion? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, I am an exit entrepreneur turned writer and content creator. So my background is basically creative agencies, working in advertising, marketing, and then co-founded a beauty brand with my husband back in 2018, which we sold in 2022. So I suddenly found myself with time and financial freedom for the first time in my life in my late 30s. And that enabled me to pursue my lifelong passion of becoming a writer. And I wanted to write about a pivotal time in my life that had really changed the trajectory of my life. It was, time in my late 20s where I kind of basically suffered a full-blown quarter-life crisis. I'd always been quite an overachiever. I thought I was tracking along quite well. And then suddenly in my mid to late 20s, I started looking around at what my peers were doing, where they were at in their lives, and comparing my situation with theirs. And I also started looking online and seeing all these very successful, very rich and beautiful people doing all these incredible things, and started feeling like I was running out of time to tick all the boxes that society expected of me. And by 29, I realized I wasn't going to tick a single box by 30. My life wasn't at all where I expected it would be at that age. I'd always just kind of internalized that traditional order of things. I expected to meet my person and, buy the house and get the career. And the boxes weren't really getting ticked. Things weren't falling into place. And I had a panic. And it all kind of culminated in a very uncool girl moment where I issued my then boyfriend with a marriage ultimatum, kind of said, if you don't commit, I'm quitting. And he said no, politely. But that hard stop was actually the most helpful thing that could have happened to me, because at 29, nearly 30, it was the first time in my life that I stopped to question where all those expectations I had of life had come from anyway. Were they even my own expectations? Were they even in line with the way I wanted to live my life? And it was only by doing all the inner work and, really starting to challenge those societal expectations and challenge that timeline that I'd internalized to the point of panic, that I realized those goals were not mine anyway. They were things that other people did. They were things that other people expected, and, the traditional order of things. What I realized at that point at 30 was actually the life I wanted didn't include getting married and having kids and buying a house right now. It included traveling the world, living in different countries, meeting lots of different people, starting a company, making myself deliberately financially insecure, which is the opposite of settling down. And that's what I did. I kind of threw out the rule book and wrote a new set of rules, took all the pressure off myself. And the irony of taking the pressure off and pushing back on all those deadlines and those expectations was that I achieved more than I ever could have imagined. By 40, my life looked incredibly different to the life I expected to live, but it was so much better. So I want to just reassure anyone who's in their 20s right now and panicking, a decade makes all the difference. Everything is temporary, especially your feelings. And, the situation you're in right now is not the situation you will stay in. You're probably in the decade of uncertainty, and that's okay. That's normal.
I think we've done our young people a disservice. Your generation, it may have been your generation as well, but I know for sure in the last 20 years, the disservice is we've conditioned them, taught them in this culture to look outside of themselves for their direction. There's so much. It's not just about social media, even though we blame social media on everything, and it has its part, but it's just our kids have not learned how to get quiet, turn inward, listen to themselves, listen to their gut, listen to their intuition. There's much more. You mentioned before that in your early mid-20s, you started comparing yourself to other people. I think this generation has, I think more so than in the past, is much more outward directed than they need to be.
Yeah. And I think, the danger of seeking that external inspiration is that you see, goals that might be unachievable. You don't see what's gone into, the journey that other person's been on. Seeking external validation is beyond your control. You can't control what other people are going to say and do and how many likes you get on your post and whether other people like your haircut. What you can control is how you feel about that, the stories and the narrative you tell yourself. So I think young people at the moment, all of us really as humans, we have a hard time separating the sort of neutral facts from the meanings and the fears that we attach to those facts. So, we'll say, I'm single, I'm 29, I'm still single. That is a fact. You are single, you are unpartnered. That's the fact. The dangerous part is the stories that we then tell ourselves about why we're single, the things that are wrong with us. And that's the part that we need to kind of help young people to interrupt as well.
We're talking with Kate Berski. That's Berski. She's the author of a new book called 30 Phobia, Why Your 20's Suck and How to Get Unstuck. It's a great book. There's a picture. If you're on YouTube, you can see it. It's a great book. I read it and I really liked it. There's lots of great information in there. How do you coach, or how can we get our young people to learn how to turn inward more? It sounds so easy to stop looking out there and instead look inward, but it's not. I don't know that it's quite that easy of a switch.
Yeah, I completely understand. And there's definitely, tools and tricks that you can do. And one simple thing I really like to do is ask people to pay attention to the language they're using and the stories they're telling. So whether you're journaling or whether you're sitting down with a close friend or family member, just talk through, vocalize your fears. And most of the time, young women will have one fear which rises to the top. I'm never going to find my person. I'm never going to be financially secure. I've no idea where I'm going with my career. Which one is coming to the top? Take that fear and really talk it through at length and pay attention to the language you're using about that fear and that anxiety. And oftentimes I will hear the word should. We are shoulding all over ourselves. Yeah. The thing about the word should is it is an indicator of an external expectation, an external pressure, a societal pressure. If you can't reframe that should as a genuine want or need, then maybe it's not really a life goal that you need to be focusing on and prioritizing and panicking about right now. It happened to me. It wasn't until my 30s that I figured this whole thing out, that, who cares if society said I should be a mother by now? Who cares if society said I should be married by this age? That's not the life that I want to choose for myself. So I think it's about recognizing that language you're using and really starting to identify if that is a priority for you, if it can be reframed as a want or a need. If it can, great. That is a priority for you. Then we can use some techniques to help you get unstuck in that area. And there's lots of things I talk about in the book about setting realistic goals. So if you've identified that is genuinely a goal, one thing I talk about is reframing your goals and moving away from that milestone mentality. So that focusing on the end goal, that panicking about the deadline that we all do, and instead become more process positive. So let's say your goal, your genuine goal that you identified, I want to find somebody. I want to find a romantic partner, let's say. You can't control whether you're going to meet that person by a certain age. You can't, literally snap your fingers and ensure that you'll meet that person. And I wouldn't recommend that anyway. Deadline dating is not to be recommended because marry in haste, repent at leisure and all that. So definitely taking your time. But instead, if that is a genuine goal, what can you control? What behaviors can you commit to? What process goals can you set for yourself that are within your control, that are small, achievable, and little inch stones? So instead of saying, I need to meet my person by 30 and panicking, say, I need to invite one new person to coffee every month, and not have the agenda of I need to be married by 30, but just have the agenda of being open, meeting people. Or, I challenge myself every time I'm standing in line for coffee, I'm going to speak to one new person. Again, without agenda, without expectation, but just practicing that meeting, making connections, putting yourself in the path towards your goal, but not focusing on the summit of Everest and sitting at the bottom panicking, because the only way we get anywhere is one small step in front of the other.
You also talk in your book about how important it is for people to define success on their own terms, I guess is the best way of saying it, because the culture has told them this is what it looks like. And I was thinking of two things as you were talking. One of them was I was listening, but I was also thinking one of them was that as a woman, as a girl, I think that good girl conditioning is still out there, that you're supposed to be a certain way. I also think that this is true in America. You're from Europe, but I think it's true there. I've spoken in different countries in Europe. I think there's this prescribed path that we're sort of pushing all kids on. Getting good grades and going to a good college and getting a good job and making a lot of money. And I think there's this path that they're supposed to be on. And so you kind of veered off. But it takes a lot of courage, I think, to veer off and say, that's not my path and that's not my definition of success. That means you need to take the time, I guess, to think about what is my definition? What does success look like for me?
Yeah. And I think the key is what you said. It's that we don't take pause. We just kind of get on the treadmill and we just work through the steps and we go through the process and we do the same things that people around us are doing. And we never stop to question if this is right for me. And there's nothing wrong with a traditional path if that is something that makes you happy. But I think at some point, if you're on the wrong path, you will find out. And if it's not a quarter life crisis, it's a midlife crisis. Something will happen that will stop you in your tracks. You will be forced at some point to evaluate. For me, it happened earlier rather than later, potentially. But I know also plenty of women who did, tick all the boxes, really successful at work. They did get married, they did have the children, and they woke up at 35 deeply unhappy with their life and trying to figure it all out at that point, trying to undo some really big life choices. So arguably a quarter life crisis is much more easy to solve because you haven't yet maybe committed to all those paths and those choices yet. So yeah, of course it is, it can be a very difficult and brave thing to do. But I think tuning in again to your feelings and your intuition will always tell you. Yeah. And let's take dating, for example. I think so much of the time, especially with what you said about that good girl conditioning, we're conditioned as women to worry about what the other person thinks of us. Does he like me? Did he find me funny? Did he like the way I look? What does he think? Well, we don't tune in as much to how that person made us feel. How did that person make me feel about myself? How did I come away feeling about myself after interacting with that person? Same goes for friendships. Same goes for jobs. I think if you're living an unaligned life, you'll feel it. You'll know it. There'll be a deep sense of unhappiness, unrest, anxiety potentially. So I think it's just, again, trying to learn to take pause and tap into how you're really feeling about a situation and really trusting yourself a little bit more.
Yeah. I tell girls, young women all the time, they might want to switch out of wanting to be wanted into what do I want? But, I think social media and all that stuff has caused them to, want to be attractive, wanted, but that's not necessarily what they want.
Yeah. And I think the society has done quite a bad disservice to women by valuing the external a lot. And particularly young women in their 20s place a huge amount of emphasis on the external validation and the value of their external self, their appearance, basically. And, really they need to start to recognize that their true value is internal. And I always counsel young women, try to write down what are your best qualities. What are the things you want to be remembered for? What are the things your friends and family love about you? I can guarantee it's not your hairstyle. Start to really validate yourself and start to focus on those positive inner virtues, because those are enduring and those are never going to leave you.
I also wonder, in our culture, I think it's probably true in your culture as well. I think kids are really busy, and there's this whole push for being on these, in our country, they call them club sport teams, select teams, where they're playing year round. They're playing 4 or 5 days a week. They're at tournaments. Everything is about not enjoying today, not enjoying what you're doing. It's about someday you might get a college scholarship, or it's all about some future reward down the road. But so you need to be on this path doing all these things. And I think they've been conditioned not to just enjoy the moment. Like you were talking before, these are my words, not yours. Like instead of enjoying the process, they're so focused on the destination that they miss out on today.
Yeah, completely agree. They're kind of learning deferred happiness. I mean, it's really sad that I think a lot of young people now are living life in the waiting room. They talk like, I'll be happy when I've got this scholarship. I'll be happy when I've got this money, when I've got this partner, but you have to learn to be happy now. And that doesn't mean that you need to achieve all the things now. I think we need to, as a society, get better at celebrating the small wins and celebrating the inch stones, however small they are, and really it sounds really cheesy, but really practicing the gratitude. It's something that we've been doing around the dinner table for the last couple of years. And my 5-year-old daughter has really caught onto it. Like, what am I grateful for today? And, we want to kind of train that muscle, because it really is a muscle, your mental fitness. And part of that is, being grateful and focusing on the small wins. What are my wins today? And sometimes I'll put a shout out on my Instagram. I'll say, tell me your small wins. And it'll be everything from, I became a pet parent, to, I did my first driving lesson. I finished writing the first chapter of my book. I finally started that course. People are winning all the time, every day, in small ways. And those are things that are worth celebrating. But as a society, we only seem to focus on those mega milestones, those marriages, the huge exit from the company, the really big promotion, those huge big wins. And we're perpetuating that milestone mentality, that living in the waiting room. And, it doesn't cost anything to, be grateful now, to find things to be happy about now. Everybody can find something.
We are talking with Kate Berski. She's the author of a brand new book called 30 Phobia: Why Your 20s Suck and How to Get Unstuck. It's a really good book. I would recommend y'all read it, get it, buy it, read it. And not just if you have kids in their 20s, but also younger kids. No matter what age your kids are who are listening to this, you're preparing them all along the way to be able to approach their futures, their 20s, in a more healthy way than I think they are today. One of the things that my old mentor a long time ago, Dr. T. Barry Brazelton, talked about something called touch points. And touch points were times in our lives when we're about to go through a big change, like a big leap in development. And just prior to those leaps in development, kids tend to fall apart. You think about, you've been through the 2 and 3-year-old terrible twos kind of thing. Sometimes around 5 or 6, there's some fears that come up as they start to wrestle with growing up. Middle school for girls is a huge touch point, going through all kinds of changes. High school seniors who are right now thinking about, oh my gosh, I'm going to be moving on. College seniors, I'm leaving college. There's midlife crisis. For some people, when their parents pass away, empty nest. There are predictable times in our lives when we're about to go through a big change. So it's normal to have all those feelings of anxiety and uncertainty. But I don't think we've taught our kids that. I think they start to feel all those emotions and they get overwhelmed. They don't know how to handle it. They judge it, and then they sink.
Yeah. And I think, that's exactly right. Transitional times bring with them all of these fears, these anxieties. And, a lot of the work that I do is about normalizing being normal. I think sometimes young people can be almost made to feel like they're the only one that's struggling, or they're the only one that's in a particular situation. And, that's why I use a lot of data to kind of reassure people, so you're broke at 30. Well, did you know that almost everyone your age is broke? So you're single. Did you know that half the people in your age group are also single? You're living at home with your parents. I'm such a freak. No, a third of people in your age group are living at home with their parents as well. So I like to use data to reassure that, even if you're in a less than perfect situation, it's absolutely normal. And you're kind of in the majority, you're kind of all in it together. And some of the things that really surprised me. So I surveyed 2,500 women in their 20s in the UK and the US as part of my research. And, all of them had fears about the future. And, there were some really stark things like, 90% of them had fears about aging at the age of 20. You wouldn't have thought. And, I also I wrote the book in public. So I started sharing my research, my thoughts, my, content really early on. And I was shocked to find that I was getting messages from men and women as young as 18, 19, feeling like they were terrified of aging and like they were past their prime and they were already running out of time. And, it's really terrifying to hear that, because I expected this to be a 29-year-old problem, and it's not. It's starting so much earlier, those fears.
Yeah. And I think, part of it may also be because we talked before about being outward directed. Like you said before, you look online, you see all these people with these fantastic jobs and they look great and they have this perfect life. And you're like, oh my God, my life compared to that stinks. And so, so then they get discouraged and they start to get revved up, and their fears come up because they're looking outside for like this, that should be my path.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like we said earlier, social media has kind of falsely elevated our expectations of where we should be at a certain point in life. And the reality is most people your age are not in that position. You're looking at the very successful, wealthy, and beautiful 1% and people who are lying about their lives. So we need to kind of add a filter on top of everything we're looking at. And I think it's so important for young people to care about what they consume. You are what you eat, and it goes much beyond food. It's everything you listen to, it's everything you look at online, it's every TV show you watch, it's every conversation you have with the people closest to you. So you kind of need to be aware of what you're consuming, and try to make healthy choices from a young age.
I also encourage the young women I work with to interview every adult they bump into, their friends, parents, their boss at work, if whatever job they have, just people and their aunts, uncles, just adults, and or watch biographies. But ask some questions like, when you were my age, did you have it all figured out? When you were my age, did you know you'd be doing what you're doing now at age 50 or whatever? And because I think they become really surprised that most adults did not go straight from A to Z. It wasn't a straight line. It was a zigzag, kind of like, you're in the middle of some of your zigs and zags, but that's most people, but they don't know that.
Yeah, exactly. Most of us have a very squiggly success story. And what's been incredible about the journey I've been on in writing the book is I've been fortunate to meet so many amazing women, particularly, and experts in mental health, mindset, motivation. Most of them have found their purpose and their calling in their 30s, 40s, 50s. So even when it comes to career, there's no such thing as a career for life anymore. People are pivoting. There really are no deadlines on dreams anymore. I don't think there ever were, but even more so these days. You really don't have to have it all figured out by 30. And how boring would it be if you did, if you just kind of figured it all out and then you just did the same thing every day for the next 70 years? I think it's exciting. I think one of the big mindset shifts I've been through over the past 10 years is, instead of seeing uncertainty as a shortcut to anxiety, I see it as that uncertain feeling as a shortcut to opportunity. That's exciting to me, to not know what's around the corner, who I'm going to meet, what projects are going to come up, what opportunities are coming my way. So I think if you can kind of reframe, when people say when you're about to go on stage, that's not nerves, that's excitement. And I wish you to tell myself that as well. And it really helps. I'm not anxious. I'm excited. I'm excited for life.
Everybody's listening to this podcast, write this out and make a little plaque for your daughter that says there are no deadlines on dreams. That's a great mantra for them to keep saying to themselves. Maybe part of this also is I'm a boomer. So in my generation, by the time we were in our early 20s, the expectation was you'd be married, you'd have a job, you were already into your career, and then you were kind of going to be in that job/career forever. And so today it's not that way. I mean, the average age, I think, for people to get married is in their late 20s, early 30s, to have their first kid, if they have them, early, mid 30s, late 30s. So I think everything's been pushed off. So there's a much longer period of quote unquote preparation, or whatever you want to call it. I think what you call emerging adulthood. Is that
emerging adulthood now? Yeah. It goes up until 29. So we've all got time. And that emerging adulthood phase is characterized by that uncertainty and that identity exploration and that kind of anxiety, basically. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the thing about, my parents are boomers as well, and they got married when they were 21. So for me, unconsciously, every day I went past the age of 21, I felt like I was falling behind. And I hadn't really twigged that until I wrote the book. And I was like, wow, of course I was panicking by 29. I was thinking my mum was married at 21. By this age, she had 3 kids already. She had bought a house. The world has changed, but also, I have huge sympathy for today's 20-somethings, because even the economic environment in which they exist is very different to the environment in which my generation of geriatric millennials, your generation of boomers, grew up in. Just look at the cost of living is huge. Salaries have flatlined. Only less than half of today's 20-somethings will go on to out-earn their parents. That shouldn't be the case. It should have been that the next generation kind of moves the family line on, but actually we're worse off. 20-somethings are financially worse off in real terms than pensioners. So if you're a working 20-something, you're poorer than a pensioner. And there's not much said about how we're going to financially support 20-somethings. Rents have skyrocketed, cost of housing. I mean, when my parents bought a house, income to cost of housing ratio was 1 to 4. Now in most US cities, it's 1 to 8. The barriers are huge to making progress in life. So I think we do need to acknowledge that it's not because 20 somethings are buying too many lattes that they're in a difficult financial situation. It's the reality, it's the financial reality. And, they don't have anxiety because they're snowflakes and they're weak. It's because we experimented on them. They've been called the anxious generation. And there was that incredible book by Jonathan Haidt, wasn't there? I'm sure you've read it, where, it talked about how the brains of 20 somethings were rewired by social media. And, it's making it very difficult for them to progress. And it's really challenging their mental health. So I've got huge sympathy for this generation. And I don't support, those headlines which just call them, snowflakes and, other mean words. It's a tough time out there.
But they are buying too many lattes at the Starbucks.
but nobody ever saved a house deposit by swerving Starbucks.
Yes. But we're talking to Kate Berski. She's the author of a brand new book, which you all should buy and read. It's called 30 Phobia: Why Your 20s Suck and How to Get Unstuck. Any last advice you have for parents who have kids who are in their teens, maybe they're young adults, about how best to support them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm not a parent of a teen, I'm a parent of a 5-year-old, but the things I'm doing, it's just talking with them. I think, I listened to a brilliant episode that you created the other day, and it was all about connection being the key. And I think just being that safe place, being that safe connection to your children or anybody else in your network, and just being open to conversations, creating that space to talk to them about their day and how they're feeling and the things they're worried about. And instead of, it's tempting as parents to shut down their fears. No, that's ridiculous. Oh, you've got nothing to worry about. You don't know you were born. Life's easy for young people. Well, I think I'd rather say, what is making you feel that way? And how can I support you with that? Being a little bit more open, because we actually don't know what they're going through. The world has changed a lot and they are facing some unique challenges. So I kind of hope that when I get there with my daughter, I'll come there with openness and empathy and just be that safe space for her.
And also, I think parents get, like you said before, that parents can give information sometimes, and also remind them that you're never behind on your path because it's your path. If you compare yourself to other people, then you may look like, feel like you're behind, but you're not ever behind on your path because it's yours and you have your own timeline.
Yeah, exactly. There's no such thing as ahead or behind. You're just on your own path. I love that.
So how can people find you? How can they find your book?
So you can find me on my website, kateberski.com. There's also a free resource on there called Mind Hacker Cards, which you can download, you can print out, and you can just use for free just to kind of help figure out some of your anxieties and your fears. It's basically a little conversation starter game that you can play with a close friend. So that's there for you. And you can find me on Instagram at Kate Berski, on TikTok at 30phobia, and you can find my book 30phobia on Amazon right now.
So I'll have all those links on my show notes. So for parents who are riding a bike right now or they're walking and you don't have a pen, don't worry. I always put those in my show notes. So just go to the website and on the show notes, it'll and you have all those links. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and also thanks for the book. I think it's something we don't talk about enough, and we don't give enough support to people in their 20s. Like you say, we judge them a lot. We don't actually guide them as much as maybe and support them as we could.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a bit of an undersupported generation at the moment, a bit of an underappreciated generation. So I'm happy to be doing my bit, and I'm happy to connect with others who are also supporting. So
the book is 30 Phobia: Why Your 20s Suck and How to Get Unstuck by Kate Berski. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you giving our parents who are listening in, and also their kids, some great information.
Thank you so much, Tim. I've loved this chat.
Well, that was a great discussion. I really encourage you to read the book. Even if you have kids who are in middle school or whatever, I still think it's good to know what's coming up, know what some things you can do at this point in your daughter's life to help prepare her to be more confident and to be able to handle her future in a different way, to handle her emotions. There's uncertainty and anxiety about changes when you're starting middle school, when you're starting high school, when you're leaving high school, when you're starting college, when you're leaving college. So all along the way, there's a lot of good information in the book. And again, it's called 30 Phobia, Why Your 20s Suck and How to Get Unstuck by Kate Berski. And once again, I'll put those links for how to get a hold of the book and also Kate's website in my show notes. Thank you so much for listening in. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was interesting for you. I'll be back again next week with a brand new episode of Raising Daughters. Oh, and a quick plug. My brand new book came out about 2 weeks ago. It's called Keeping Your Family Grounded When You're Flying by the Seat of Your Pants. So you can find that on our website, or you can also find it on Amazon or wherever else you buy your books. So check out that as well. Thank you so much for stopping by. See you back here in a week.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Raising Daughters. Hopefully you've learned something useful about girls and young women and how to help them navigate the pressures, challenges, and opportunities of modern life. If you want to become a more effective parent, keep listening to the show at drtimjordan.com and let the conversations shape you. Build that one-of-a-kind connection with your daughters in the most profound and meaningful ways possible, shaping them into strong, confident women of the future. That's all for now. See you next week for another episode of Raising Daughters.